Hello and welcome to a brand new edition of the NBA Chats. I'm your host as always, Alen Ramich. Joining with me today is a guest who came on while it was the Lakers side chats. He is, in my opinion, he's the best salary cap guy when it pertains to anything NBA wise. But I do have one question for you, Eric, before we start. Will Stanley Johnson signing for the rest of the season hard cap the Lakers?
Yeah, I had a feeling that was coming. No, sir, will not.
Yeah, we have the wonderful Eric Pincus on. Obviously, he is a Bleacher Report writer. He's also, by the background, he is very involved in the sports business classroom side of things. How are you doing today, sir?
Wait, it's this finger. Excellent. Yeah, there we go. Sports business classroom. So I'm doing great. We're a few weeks out of the trade deadline, so this is kind of a busy time for me to kind of for writing and for everything's kind of trade deadline centered, and then after that we'll get to playoff centric, draft centric, and free agency centric kind of questions. So yeah, let's dig into it. We have some problems we're going to try to solve. Let's figure them out.
So the first problem isn't really around the trade deadline or cap wise or anything like that. It's the Lakers and what seems to be a very I don't know. It's a toxic situation, in my opinion. When a guy's being evaluated game to game on a coaching level, I don't think it can lead to any good with Frank Vogel. What do you make of that whole situation? Because for me, looking at it from the outside, looking in, which you are as well, I don't know. I don't like the whole evaluating game to game thing. I think it's really bad for any coach, regardless of how bad they're doing or not.
Sure. Well, I wrote on this last week at Bleacher Report from being around the situation, talking to people. And like, is Frank Vogel the problem? And fundamentally, no, he's not the problem. Is he the solution? Probably not either. And so he is generally, when you ask around the league and you talk to different teams, they're going to say, first of all, what's wrong with the Lakers has nothing to do with Frank Vogel. No one I've spoken to believes that in the entire, like I have zero. Usually it's mixed. Like when you ask a question about anything NBA is going to be mixed. No one I've talked to outside of, the Laker world thinks it's Frank Vogel's fault for why the Lakers are what they are. But I think when you hire Frank Vogel, you should know what you're getting. And my interpretation of who he was before they hired him feels pretty accurate. He's an adequate offensive coach, and he's a very good defensive coach. Given the opportunity to actually coach, like they've had so many players in and out of the lineup. They've had so many injuries. You can argue and debate that he's not properly using the pieces. You could, but look at the pieces, and Laker fans, just like any fan of any team, tends to initially overvalue their players and then sort of undervalue them at the same time, where it's like, oh, this guy's terrible. You start to, they go from they're the best to being they're the worst very quickly. There's very little middle ground of understanding. Like when Anthony Davis comes back, people can go into the roles they're supposed to play within, and therefore everyone will be better because Anthony Davis is there. And it's not even the numbers of what Anthony Davis does in a box score. It's just him being there and people being where they're supposed to be. Now, Vogel could still play DeAndre Jordan or Dwight Howard with Anthony Davis, when the Lakers probably, just based on where they're at, they should probably play smaller. And but there was a report out of the LA Times that there was basically pressure from the front office. They named Kurt Rambis as the source of that, who's one of the top basketball decision makers on the team, was really pressuring the coaching staff to stay big, which kind of goes contrary to how, if you believe Lakers Twitter, if you read the analysts who break it down day to day, who I tend to listen to and trust, and some I don't, but some I do trust. But a lot of people are saying, yeah, Lakers need to go small. And I could say, yeah, maybe going small, given that you have so many guards and you have, two bigs who are older. Dwight Howard, I think, has been okay this year. DeAndre, I thought, was, about what you'd expect for DeAndre, where he's at. And I'm a big fan of DeAndre as a person. I've known him since he got drafted. But at this point, he's probably a reserve, and probably like an emergency reserve, which is cool, right? Like, go get paid. I hope he sticks around for years to come as that emergency reserve, but he's not a frontline starter anymore. So, we'll have to see. Like, firing Vogel, the problem there, to your point of like a toxic environment, like putting it out there, leaking as they did, that Vogel was in trouble, only makes it worse. And how are you going to replace him? Is it just going to be David Fizdale? Does he appreciably make the situation better? He's their top assistant, arguably, and so like Fizdale was, I think, 1-5 when he took over. Again, it was in the midst of injuries and protocols and stuff. But if you want to actually replace him with the guy that they want to have for the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, that's going to be really hard midseason. Number one, everyone knows they have a team that's kind of messed up just based on personnel, at least in the league. Whether the Lakers recognize that or not is a different story. But everyone around the league says like they blew it with the Westbrook thing. It's a terrible idea, et cetera, et cetera. Now that may not be true, and you may be listening and saying, "Oh no, they should have done Westbrook." I'm not talking about whether they should or shouldn't. I'm saying the perception from others who might want to take that job and go to a situation that they don't believe in. They're going to want like a 5-year deal. And the last time the Lakers hired a coach, they didn't want to do Lou because he wanted more than 3 years. So you could argue Mike D'Antoni if they're going to go small. They've done that before. And the problem, you're flipping problems. If Vogel's a better defensive coach, not a good offense, not a good or an adequate offensive coach, D'Antoni's a very good offensive coach and marginal defensive coach, and he's going to want multiple years, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so I don't see the solution. I don't see how firing Vogel helps. Now, maybe they've just decided he's just that bad. It's the same team that made the decision to get Westbrook, which some people would say is that bad. So if they don't want to take the responsibility of making these moves and saying, okay, we thought it would work, it didn't, then sure, blame the coach and use him as a scapegoat. But I just don't think it's realistic. And then putting it out as they did, as you mentioned, it created more of a toxic situation. So, fun covering the Lakers this year. To be honest, it is fun. It is like at the beginning of the year, I told my editors, like, if the Lakers are one of the top teams, they don't really have any trade assets. There might not be a lot of content that I can produce when it comes to like if they're great, I could say, okay, yeah, they're great because of this. But if there's no adversity and there's no trades that are needed, and it may be a difficult year to write for the Lakers, because when they're just, any team you're covering, if they're just killing teams by 20 points a game every night, and what are you going to do? What are you going to write? Oh yeah, they're going to trade. No, they're just going to keep winning. And so I thought it would be a more difficult year to write, but from like the jump, it's been nonstop problems. So that's been good for business from that point of view. It's kept me really active.
Yeah, like it's a weird one, because I don't know, like all feelings that you have about Vogel as a coach aside, because you might think he needs to go, you might think he's not the problem, whatever. I'm as a coach myself, I firmly believe if you know that your job is on the line every single game you coach, I just think it's a bad look for everyone involved. There's no need to leak it, first of all. It puts the coach under an unnecessary pressure when the pressure of coaching a team with LeBron James on is ridiculously high anyway. And then you add Westbrook to that and all these veterans. And then I like the Lakers young guys. I think they're really fun and really, especially like with the emergence of Stanley Johnson. I think Austin Reeves has been phenomenal for an undrafted rookie.
Sure.
There's a lot. And it just seems like if they were going to, if they're at that point where they're evaluating him game to game, surely it would be, I don't know. I just feel like they should make a decision either way, whether they should keep him till the end of the year and then do whatever you want in the offseason, or get rid of him now. And then at least you have a picture of where you're going. Like, I don't like this state of uncertainty. I think it's bad.
Right. Does it make it worse if you fire him now and then if Fizdale is the guy, then Fizdale finishes the season? Are they confident that Fizdale is going to do a better job? If the goal is to make the playoffs and to have the best approach you can to the playoffs, of which Vogel knows how to handle, he knows how to build a defensive game plan. Like, he's sort of built for that. That's what he does. Mm-hmm. In a playoff matchup, he can build out a defensive game plan. Now, it may not be a great one. It may not work. It couldn't work against the Suns once AD went down last year and they didn't have the talent. But he's really 1 for 1 with an incomplete. And if you want to say the Lakers should have won and beat the Suns without AD last year, and that's on Vogel, that's fine if that's your opinion. If so, then fire him. But I mean, I can point out like things that I don't like about how they approach things, and I could say like drop coverages in this day and age probably aren't ideal. That there are aspects that of what they're doing defensively and certainly offensively that's not particularly overwhelmingly like, wow, they're playing great basketball. It's just not happening. Does that change with Fizdale? That's all. Like teams barely practice anymore. It just based on the schedule, based on protocols, just based on life. NBA teams don't get a lot of chance to practice. Once you're knee deep in the season, practice goes out the window. And when you've had players come and go like they've had, and they haven't had none for a minute, and they're not going to have none for a minute for at least another month, if not more. So, everyone else is a minimum player other than the 3 stars in THT. So, there's a reason why guys are minimum players. It's not to say they're not good players, but it's not like the Lakers have what the Grizzlies have, which is a bunch of guys who were recently drafted, who have earned some recognition. John Morant, even Dylan Brooks, who's not that recent, Desmond Bane, JJ, Triple J, like Steven Adams is a good veteran. I'm not a huge fan of his game necessarily, but he plays a role there. Like Kyle Anderson, Melton, like Tyus Jones is probably one of the best true point guards in the game, reserves anyway. That's not saying a lot because there aren't like most point guards aren't true point. Ja is not a true point guard. Most point guards are scorers. If you go to the traditional sense of what a point guard's supposed to do in the earlier stages of the game, is history of the game is just create for others, run the offense, make sure the scorers on the wing or inside. If you go back traditionally enough, it was just make sure the big gets the ball, right? Mm-hmm. Then eventually it just flipped with Michael and Kobe's and stuff and Kawhi and LeBron. Well, LeBron's a whole different thing, to be like wing scorers, right? You started to win off of wings. So, but Tyus Jones is like a really nice player. And you just go like through the list, like when they've got the young kids that we talked, you mentioned Reeves and you could say THT, whether you're happy with what he's doing this year or not, like Zaire Williams and like, they have Brandon Clark, like you just go down the list. This is a team where the most expensive paid player is Steven Adams, making $17 million a year, right? So they're the polar opposite of how the Lakers are built, and they're having great success because they have that star in Ja. But when he got hurt, they were still really good. This team, the Lakers, are built where they're super top heavy, the top heaviest team in the league. The only other team close is Miami. I mean, I could look and see if there's others. There might be others, but Miami's kind of a nice mirror where it's like Bam and Lowry and Jimmy, and then it's Duncan is kind of like your THT level guy where he makes more than THT, but where he's not making outrageous money, although his contract goes on forever. That's a different story. And they've got like their none would be PJ Tucker, where you have one guy who's under 10 but above 5 or 5 or above, and then everyone else is like minimum players more or less. And they do have Tyler Hero, so they're a little bit better, one extra piece who's a really nice piece, but the rest of them are minimum players. These teams, like if Jimmy got hurt, they're going to struggle. Bam got hurt, they struggled. Kyle gets hurt, they're going to struggle. Whereas those teams that aren't built so top heavy can handle that. And the Lakers are just not a team that can handle it. They're just not built that way. And they knew that making that decision. They just had to take that risk that they can survive the regular season, get all 3 of their stars healthy, and then maybe pick some people up off of trade or buyout market and be that special team. And the thing is, AD's coming back probably the next game. By the time you're listening to this thing, may be playing. Yeah. So, like maybe all this drama of the last 2 months was actually the young players growing into roles, finding Stanley Johnson, finding ways to be mediocre without AD. Right, because they were kind of mediocre with AD, but then they didn't have Braun back then too, right? And they didn't have Taylon, Horton, Tucker. It's real easy to forget. Like this team has had a crappy run when it comes to health. They haven't had like the Jamal Murray type injuries where it's like someone's out for the whole year. Michael Porter's out for the whole year, but they've had. I mean, none has just been not there, and they've had. I mean, how many games have they had Russell Westbrook, LeBron, and AD, and Taylon, Horton, Tucker?
I think you can count it on one hand, can't you? Like it's barely any. Yeah, it is. And I think that makes a bit, and I think that's a really good point. And then obviously Taylon Horton Tucker, who I think's been really good the past 7 or 8 games. Um, Obviously he was coming off the thumb surgery, and then he got COVID. And with young players, I expect them to struggle at times because Taylon Horton Tucker's only turned 21, right? And it's a difficult situation, which is why I don't know. I'd be much more willing to accept the Lakers if they just said, "Yeah, Frank's our guy till the end of the season, regardless of what happens." Like I said to you, I just don't like the uncertainty of it, and I don't think it's fair on the players. I don't think it's fair on the coach. And hopefully, like you said, with AD coming back, he's probable against Brooklyn, but as I'm recording tomorrow. So I'm hoping that as a Laker fan, I'm not trying to be too Laker homer here. I'm hoping that does help turn the season around a little bit anyway, because I enjoy watching good basketball.
Yes, sir. Well, I don't think you've enjoyed. I'm speculating, but I don't think you've enjoyed a lot of good basketball this year because you can probably count on your hands, one or two hands, probably one hand, how many games where you've been like fully satisfied with the way the Lakers have played this year in a game. I mean, there was a game recently they beat. They had a good win the other day. I forget. They're all blurring together at this point. They've had a few really nice showings, but mostly it's been a nice showing in the first quarter. The first half of the season was all of I guess so. The first quarter of the season, the first half of the half was all third quarter blown leads, right? Like it didn't matter if they were up 20 or 10 or 5 or within striking distance at the half, they would fall apart in the third.
Mm-hmm.
I do think I think they're going to be better. I think it's going to be demonstrably better once AD is back. But he also had a leg injury, so this will be a test for he is he young enough where he can bounce back? Like Trevor Ariza came in after a long bout with a leg injury. Anything like foot, knee, hamstring, anything that keeps you from running and playing is a problem. At least with THT, it was the thumb. And he's also really young, so he could bounce back. COVID kind of knocked him out a little bit. But in the case of AD, not playing for this period of time, he is an elite player. He is an elite athlete. So maybe he's going to, I would expect him to bounce back better than Ariza did, because Ariza is like literally towards the end, whereas AD's in his prime. So AD might need a game or two to kind of find himself, but assuming within 2-3 games he's himself and can play and get back to that kind of shape, then I think the Lakers will be fine. If it's like he needs a month to get back into shape, they're going to struggle and everyone's going to stay negative about them and say AD didn't solve any problems, da 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 da. And it just might be that he needs to ramp up and needs the next 6 weeks to do so. And these are the questions that the Lakers have going into the deadline. Do they panic? Do they rush? And it hasn't felt like their moves have been made with great deliberation. The moves dating back to the arrival of Magic and then Rob Pelinka, Magic Johnson, who was there briefly. And then Rob, like if you look at the ledger of moves that they've made, you can find fault with almost all of them, including the AD trade, which you make, if that's the only trade they can make to get AD, you make it every time. Fine. Were they bidding against anyone else? No. They were bidding against the pressure from Clutch to make AD happen in LA. That's artificial. That could be managed, right? No one else was getting AD. Everyone in the league knew no one else was getting AD. The Celtics were a team that thought they could. They found out very quickly they can't, right? You go back to that. You say, well, they traded Danny Green with a pick to get Dennis Schroeder and then let him go. They traded Svi Mikhailuk with a pick, a second, to get Reggie Bullock and then let him go. You just start going, they traded Zubats for Mike Muscala and let him go. And Zubats a really nice player. I mean, whether you could say Zubats is not, an all-star, fine. But that's kind of the point. Like, you need quality throughout. I mean, you almost need quality more throughout on the margins for a team like the Lakers than you do for any other team, that's not so top heavy. Like that's why you need an Austin Reeves and a Stanley Johnson. But like, it's an indictment of sorts to say, like, why is it that, like, you shouldn't be finding unexpected riches. Like, you should be finding deliberate riches and unexpected riches. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And like Monk has come around and has been a pretty consistent player for
Yeah.
them. I think the recent streak where he was starting and scoring, averaging around 20 a game, was probably higher than what he's going to be able to do consistently. It's not, there was a change in style of play. It's that teams adjusted to what they were doing. And then also, he's not somebody who's going to shoot like that every night. If he was, Lakers never would have gotten him. He would have done that in Charlotte, right? You just start going through like Carmelo shoots really well at home, but if you over rely on him, then the efficiency drops because he's older. You start going through those little lists of things. I do think, to kind of bring it back, is that you get AD back, and then the team, people can, once he's in shape, which hopefully would be quick. And I say hopefully not as a fan. I'm a fan of the game. I want KD back. I want Caruso healthy.
Yeah,
I want
100%.
I want to see the best athletes in the world playing basketball at the highest level. So, when we get to the playoffs, we have the best teams and we could see the best competition. And it's a beautiful game. It's just, it's unfortunate that the Lakers didn't have AD in the playoffs, because I would have loved to have seen how that went. And if the Suns win, great. If they, it's just the nature of things, not the Suns' fault that they didn't have to go through AD and had an easier route. But, sometimes you get the benefit of the other team getting hurt. But we'll see. I look forward to the next, maybe not the first game. There's a little bit of emotion. Maybe they win against the Nets because of emotion. I do think there's going to be a little bit of a lag until until the team is full on, being what they're supposed to be. And even then, we still have some of the issues that Westbrook can't shoot, THT can't shoot. How does it all fit together? How do you make it work? And that's going to be that should be the puzzle for Vogel the next month, but it might not. If they had lost to the Magic, or if they had gotten blown out by the Heat, I think Pelinka would have left him in one of those swamps in Florida, and he never would have made it to New York, to Brooklyn. I'm telling you. So we'll have to wait and see how long this drama goes on.
Yeah, I think it's a really nice segue, because obviously the trade deadline, like you said, is about 2 weeks away now. And I can't wait for it to be over, just for all the speculation to stop, to be honest with you. There's so much of it, and even though I enjoy it, it's like I think we're at that point in the trade deadline season where there's misinformation being spread by general managers, and there's games being played, and I respect it, to be honest with you. If you're a GM, you try and get as much as you can for any player, right? So I'm really intrigued, because I don't know. I, as just a person, and not looking at him as a Laker, I think Taylon Horton Tucker is a guy who I think can be a really good NBA player. And I don't know, I'm quite surprised by, it seems like, what his value is around the league. And I'm sure you know more about this than I do. It doesn't seem that high to me. And I don't know if it's because of the new contract that he signed, or whatever it is. I don't know if you can shed more light on that, because I'm really intrigued as to what his value is around the league.
Well, so he was first noticed, he played his first year in the G League almost the whole year. And then in the playoffs had a brief 5, 6, 7 minute stint where in the playoffs he got to play against the Rockets and James Harden, and he played really well. And it was like, oh, okay, this guy actually might be something. And then last year he showed so many glimpses of what he could be. He showed that, number one, he's really, really crafty around the basket and has a knack for finishing in traffic. But he there were the questions were, can he shoot, and can he operate as the primary scorer in certain situations where teams can load up and understand how he plays. Now I think teams have scouted him and they're like, okay, always play him to drive and back off of him, because if you're playing up on somebody, like Avery Bradley is known for sort of playing in someone's jersey, playing right up in their face, and he can get beat a lot because of that. And that's okay as long as your defensive scheme is built for that concept. But teams know that there's no reason to guard THT like that. The whole point is, don't let him get a first step on you. Back off of him, give him the jumper. If you're guarding him one-on-one on the perimeter, you want him to shoot the ball. You want him to shoot a three. And if Lakers have other issues with their paint being clogged for other reasons, and they're they have non-shooters in technically Stanley Johnson, Russell Westbrook, Trevor Ariza, not really. I mean, he's kind of iffy as a shooter at this point. You just go down the list, and it like I think they had penciled in a backcourt of Westbrook and THT, and like just on paper, I'm like, oof, like especially if you're going big, if you're going with DeAndre or something like that, you have like 3 non-shooters with LeBron and AD. That's rough. As far as space, there's just nowhere to go. And I think also with LeBron and Westbrook handling the ball as much as they do, I don't think that gives THT the opportunity to kind of find his game. So to me, on this team, he's a bench player. And I just think he's sort of been exposed as not being a grown-up NBA player, and he's 21. And like you would like to see somebody just adapt to all situations and be like, give me a role, I'll find a way to fit in. You might get that out of a 28 to 35-year-old player.
I think Larry Nance is a great example of that. That's just a name that popped into my head when you said that.
Sure. And that is a good example, except that's kind of like, that's more like there are guys who will come in, like Austin Reeves is more of that too.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's not to say that young guys can't do that, as much as like you have to know who they are and what they are. Like THT is a scorer. That's what he is. His potential in the league is as a scorer. Now it might also be as a defender, which is something Vogel's trying to do. He's got a great wingspan. He's a little short for he really should be a 6'7", 6'8" slasher who can create a little bit, but he's like a 6'4" slasher who has a 6'10" wingspan or something crazy. But it only goes so far. What I don't know his exact wingspan. That might be exaggerated, but he has a very long. Right. Okay. So yeah, it's not even big enough. He's got like ridiculous wingspan, but which makes him taller in a sense. But he, learning defense, like kids learn offense, like the drills that you run in AU or just rec league, like on the way up are like offensive skills, and they play, especially when you're a star player, you kind of grow up as the scorer. And you get to the NBA and you don't know how to play defense because you really haven't been asked to play like a significant role on defense. Now you're a role player and you're being asked to learn that. And a lot of guys who get to the NBA because they were really talented scorers, not because they were really good defenders. Now they need to learn how to do that. And so that's kind of where THT is. So I think the value is that, number one, a lot of prospects like THT are on minimum contracts or really small contracts, like rookie scale, that are in between 2 million and 5 million, right? Whereas he's closer to 10 a year, and he's with Clutch, which means that there's sort of an understanding that Clutch makes it really difficult. Like they really fight for their players, as they should, but they're not like necessarily like an easy negotiation. And so he doesn't have the longest contract, which in a way can backfire. He really only has 1 more year, right? Because the next year after that is a player option. And he's not restricted after that. So, the danger is how much you're going to give up for this kid who's 21, who isn't a full-fledged proven player yet, who only has 1 year left, who's then going to, if he does deliver, now we got to pay him. And if he doesn't, then we wasted assets and we let him go. So, it's not a slam dunk. It's not like most prospects will be restricted before they get to free agency. Like when they get to free agency, they'll be restricted, is what I'm saying. So you'll have an advantage. Like, I don't, we can go down the list, but Tyler Hero, for instance, DeAndre Ayton,
PJ Washington in a year and a half is a guy who's been in trade conversations.
Miles Bridges this summer, Miles Bridges, right? So this summer. So like you're in a situation where, okay, fine, the negotiations may be difficult, but you're guaranteed, like if the Suns want to keep DeAndre Ayton, no matter what, unless he retires from basketball, as long as he stays in the NBA, he is going to play for the Suns if they want that to happen, because they can match any offer anyone else gives him. He could stay for 1 year in theory on a qualifying offer, but that would be like, I have to look, maybe let's call it 12 million or something like that. I forget his exact number, but let's say it was 12 million. That's unrealistic given that the offers would be closer to 100 million or whatever, but it's technically possible. Whereas with Taylon Horton Tucker, that's the bigger issue is that he'll hit free agency soon, not right away. And technically, bird rights are great. Bird rights are more valuable this year. If he was going to be a free agent this summer, he might actually be more valuable, arguably, because he'd be a restricted free agent, right? Because he's only this will be after his third year. He'd be restricted, and almost no one has any money this year. There's very little free agent money, so you're probably in a if you're going after Bridges, Ayton, Sexton, you're in a good. If you have their rights, you're in a great position because there's no one else who can really offer more than what you would pay them. So that's not the case on paper. We'll see what the league looks like in 2023, which is we're about to hit 2022 offseason. 2023 offseason will be different. Right now, it projects that there will be a lot of money in the system. We don't know because things change, but the expectation is that there will be a lot more teams, and now you've got to worry about other teams trying to poach the guy. So the THT thing is more complex than just someone saying, "Oh, I think he'll be really good. I want to go take a stab at him." And I do think there are teams that are interested, but there are other young players who are probably cheaper, don't have to deal with clutch, don't have to deal with the unrestricted free agency that's coming up, that are more valuable perhaps than THT.
Yeah, that's actually a really, really nice breakdown, because usually you don't, and I understand that writers just have to get stuff out all the time, but you don't usually get that type of breakdown as to why THT maybe isn't as valued in trade talks as other guys are, like you said, a PJ Washington or a Miles Bridges or someone like that, where you have absolute control over them as long as you want them into this second contract, right? So yeah, I think that's a really good point. The one thing I've noticed, and I'm sure you probably noticed this as well, is that the Lakers don't seem to want any money tied up post 2023. Even the Westbrook trade, the deal, even if he picks up his player option, which I fully anticipate him to, ends in 23. Jeremy Grant's deal, who's been the big guy who's been touted like as being a target for the Lakers. How realistic that is, I'm not sure. But even his contract ends in 2023. Is there anything like there with that? Because it seems like it's a common theme. Like even the contract offers that were in the summer, like Alex Caruso, for example, it was well reported that the Lakers offered him a 2-year deal. Is that just how the front office operates, or is that just them with a targeted plan to have cap space in 23?
So LeBron's money comes up after next year. So LeBron's going into his last year. It's at 44, almost call it 45 million, right? Mm-hmm. So that's for 22, 23. Then he's a free agent. Now, this is the Lakers have to decide, like, who are they? Is LeBron gonna be sticking around? Are they gonna reinvest? If so, are they gonna pay him about the max, give or take? Are they gonna pay him in the 40s to $50 million range? And if they do, then that's going to eat up most of their money, and it's not really going to matter necessarily how much. Like, it's maybe they could get a third piece. Certainly, it probably means there's no THT to do so. We could pencil in Reeves, but let's say it's just Reeves and his cap hold and AD and then you bring back LeBron. Yeah, I mean, maybe they could get a third star in theory, but it's not like I'd have to look at the exact math on that. And if you're paying LeBron too much, it becomes really prohibitive. So like 2-year projection that I have right now is like, if the cap is that year is 125 million, and if you're paying LeBron 47 million and you're paying AD 40 million or whatever in that range, you got a draft pick and you're paying THT, you don't have the cap room to do anything. Flat, like $14 million player. You let everyone else go, including Reeves. And fine, let's say you don't draft a player, you know, they have a pick that year, but let's say you trade the pick after the draft, which is what they've been known to do. Maybe you can get that up to 18 million. So is trading for the players that you would spend 18 million on that year, trading for them now better? Absolutely, because then you don't have to pare it down to the nub. However, if you are letting LeBron go, and whatever, you can get to like massive money. They can get to like 70 million or something crazy, and that's kind of like the ballpark. So it's a decision that you have to make now. Is LeBron a priority past this contract? And if he is, then wouldn't winning now with LeBron should be the primary goal. Absolutely. Anyway. And are you anticipating that he's not there anymore? And if you are, and you're holding back winning with LeBron because he's not going to be there in in another year and a half or whatever, two seasons. Like, what are we trying to do here? What's the point of having him if you're not trying to win when you have him, because you're anticipating he might leave, and maybe he should leave, and maybe you don't pay him at that age, or maybe you do. So I don't know. I mean, clearly the 2023 math has, in my opinion, been a significant deterrent for the Lakers in spending. They've sort of matched their money. Okay, Westbrook comes off, LeBron comes off. Let's see what we can do then. And maybe that's the right way to go about it. You know, for me, I feel like, you know, the opportunity to actually win is so slim that you need to take full advantage of it. I don't think the Lakers did this offseason. I thought the decisions at the time, I said I could understand the logic. I didn't agree with it, but I was like, you could argue that Westbrook will help them win more games than a Buddy Hield would. I could get that. I could get the logic. Like, Buddy's a better fit, but maybe taking that ball handling and making it easier on LeBron. And Russ has been a pretty special player throughout his career. Maybe they can make it work. But it's not like, oh, yeah, that's definitely going to work. And then you couple in the fact that teams are never fully healthy all year. So you're basically saying we can only play one way, the way that fits with Westbrook. And if we get hurt, we're not going to really have. And I'm not saying they should have gone with Buddy, but I'm saying that was the other guy they almost went with. I could argue they're spending too much time thinking about names and not enough time actually trying to build an actual team that can win, and focusing on just good basketball evaluation as opposed to name evaluation. Names are important. You need a star. I get that. I'm not saying you don't. You're not going to win if you just have a bunch of Austin Reeves and Stanley Johnsons and Malik Monks. They're all really nice players in different ways who can help you in different ways. But you need that star. And the thing is, they have that star, and they kind of have like the 1B of that star in Anthony Davis. And then you went and got, like, instead of just surrounding them with really good depth, you went out and got a very specific problematic player who can't shoot. And, like, my opinion is that best case, they win more games because of Westbrook. Best games, it totally works, and LeBron's refreshed, doesn't have to work as hard. Best case, they're healthy all year, and they're just walking into 50 wins and into a top 3 seed, maybe top 2 seed, maybe top seed in the West, right? Still, in my best case, after the trade, I'm like, I'm still terrified if I'm the Lakers, because series tend to shift on one or two moments, one or two plays. I want LeBron James making those decisions in those plays. Like, you're going to live or die by LeBron making that choice. And he's a safer choice than Kobe was in a lot of ways. Kobe had higher highs in a lot of ways, lower lows, and was more of a gambler and more reckless, but also more successful in some ways. I'm not saying LeBron's better than Kobe. I'm just saying they're different. And LeBron is like, he's like a steady, he's a good investment. Like, if you're investing in the stock market and you invest in a LeBron James fund, it's not going to jump up crazy numbers, not going to drop crazy numbers. It's going to be a steady performer every year. It's going to be a high performer. Whereas Kobe, you might have had like some brilliant jumps and you might have had some big drops. You know, he also got hurt, et cetera, et cetera. You know, to me, Westbrook is just like, you know, trusting him to make those decisions in the most important moments instead of LeBron. And you say, well, just give the ball to LeBron. Well, Russell Westbrook isn't the kind of guy who gave the ball to KD. That's just not who he is. He's going to rush. He's not going to value a possession. He's going to take a bad shot. He's going to turn the ball over in the most important moment. And maybe I'm wrong, but that was my fear, that's what would happen in the best case. And so that's what worries me. You don't usually get the best case in life, unfortunately. I wish we all did. But we usually get a combination of medium case to worst case way before you get the best case, right? So, you know, if you're building a team, in my mind, you have to treat it with here's the upside, here's the downside, here's our projection in between of where we think we'll get, you know, AD for instead of 82 games, we'll probably get AD for 70 games. We'll get LeBron for about 70 games. We'll get Westbrook for whatever, 70, you know, you figure like, okay, how do we adapt with that? For me, if you have Kuzma and KCP and you have Trez, who's a great regular season player, even if he's not a great postseason player, he helps carry a second unit scoring so much that you might win 3 or 4 or 5 more games, have just an easier time winning games just because you have Trez. And then if you can't play him much in the playoffs, okay, that's all right. You know what I mean? It's like he got you there so that your stars are fresher. You got a better seeding because of him. And then you add in Melo to that group. You add in Monk to that group. You keep Caruso, and you probably sign Nunn to be your starter instead of Westbrook. And maybe Nunn doesn't start all year, and maybe you have to do Avery or whatever it is that they do and adapt. Like, to me, that's better than making this huge gamble when, like, you've already won. You've already got the championship. You're not in a place where you need a huge gamble. So I don't fully understand the logic of it. I get their logic. I just didn't understand it at the time, because even in the best case, I still think Westbrook is the reason, is making that decision in the most important moment, because the ball doesn't get to LeBron, and because teams are going to want Westbrook to have the ball, and they're going to put him in that position to make that decision instead of LeBron James. Just
no, I enjoy listening to you. So I agree with you there. Like, if it's in a playoff situation, we've seen LeBron James come up trump so many. We saw it last year as well against Phoenix. Before AD got hurt, the Lakers looked like they were going to go up 3-1, in game 4. Obviously, we can't speculate because AD gets hurt, and then the second half pans out of game 4 as it does, and then game 5 and 6, I think, were a formality for Phoenix once AD gets hurt. But like you said, I'd much rather LeBron James has the ball in his hands than Russell Westbrook does. And that's no slight at Russell Westbrook. It's just we've seen LeBron James win 4 championships and get to 10 finals that way. But the one thing I do want to ask you is that Mark Stein put out a really interesting report on Friday evening for me, where he talks about that Houston would potentially be interested in trading for Westbrook. Now, I assume it's Houston being a rebuilding team and trying to get assets for depreciated value like Westbrook and hope that the Lakers attach a pick to it or something. I'm just wondering if there is any traction to that, because, I think for the Lakers, I don't know. As much as I think Westbrook's a clunky fit, I don't know whether I do that trade. Just, I don't know. We have no idea what John Wall is, and at least that Russell Westbrook can still play at an NBA level at this point, right? Like, that's where I am with it.
Sure. Well, I mean, Wall averaged 20 a game last year, roughly. I forget the exact number. So I thought he looked good last year. Is he better than Westbrook? Is he that different than Westbrook? He's really a non-shooter. He's really an attack guard. Is he as turnover prone as Westbrook? Probably not. Is he as assist heavy? No. Like, Westbrook will get you more assists. Westbrook's a better rebounder. Who's the better defender? I don't know where Wall is as a defender. I don't particularly care for Westbrook as a defender. I think his defense is part of the problem. His attention to detail and focus. I wrote about it. There's an article that just came out on Bleacher Report where I really tackle that issue. And so some of it is like how I mean, I didn't get into this part as much, but how willing are the Lakers to just flat out admit we blew it and we made a mistake to cash out Westbrook? I know the Rockets want compensation to make that trade, right? So, like, they could just hold on to Wall. They don't want Wall's not playing for them. If they got Westbrook probably doesn't play for them either. Either players they're probably hoping is a buyout opportunity at some point, or maybe they trade, but they're not going to pay to trade any of these guys. They're not going to pay to trade Wall, they're not going to pay to trade Westbrook. But if they can benefit to your, the way you described it exactly, if you can get a first for taking on, Lakers have a first, a 2027 first, which is way down the road. It's after AD's contract. It's after LeBron's contract. Speculatively, it could be a top pick. If it takes them a long time to recover when LeBron finally retires, they could be a mess for years. And that's what happened with Kobe, right? When Kobe got hurt, we have no idea. And so at the same time, they could quickly get 1 or 2 stars with the cap space that they would have without AD and without, if they manage it properly. I don't think people trust the current front office. I don't think people trust that Rob Pelinka is going to make great decisions around the league. And that's not to say that they're right. And Rob may be a great GM. I don't know. I just know that the opinion of other teams who would be trading for that pick don't have a lot of confidence in Rob as a decision maker building a team. So if Rob is running the team, then yeah, that pick might be more valuable. But does Rob lose his job? Is he going to stick around for the rebuild, et cetera, et cetera? So it's there's so much uncertainty. I think a pick like that for Houston, for Oklahoma City, for Detroit, for Orlando, I think those picks are valuable. For a team that is trying to win and is less committed to speculation and rebuild, I think that pick is less valuable. So I'd say there's definitely some teams that would love that pick. Should you use that pick to get rid out of Westbrook to upgrade to Wall? No. I mean, a lot of these things I wouldn't do. The problem is if I don't think they're making the kind of decisions I would recommend, if the decisions that they've been making have consistently gone against my recommendation, I kind of have to entertain the opposite of my opinion. And that's what I try to do when I do my job, is to not use my thought process, but try to get into their shoes and make the decisions from their seats. And what I wrote about was that it's not just swapping Westbrook for Wall. You can pad a player's contract in trade. So you get what's called a simultaneous trade exception. And that's not the trade exception that most people talk about, that, like the Pelicans have like a $17 million trade exception for Steven Adams, I think, something like that. That's not what we're talking about. That's non-simultaneous. Those last a year. Simultaneous lasts just in the trade itself. And that's that padding that we talk about. Like in this particular case, 125% plus $100,000 of Westbrook's salary. If you add in Taylon Horton Tucker into that, you add in Nunn, you add in a few minimum players, the Lakers could add, through that trade exception, through that, pad all that salary by 25%. And they could bring back like Eric Gordon and David Nwaba and Wall and maybe even one more. And not to say, the challenge is every $5 million that they add pushes them up to another high, to a higher tax bracket.
Mm-hmm.
Their tax could easily jump to $100 million if they took full advantage of that. If they add $5 million, it might add like 13 million or so, or 15 million in tax. So it's not an easy ask of them to say, go use Westbrook Wall to add depth that you should have had altogether, and then pay the price that the Rockets would want for you to do that. It doesn't feel realistic. I feel like there's a pathway where it could get so toxic with Westbrook that I guess so. And at that point, they're paying to get rid of him, and the Rockets are probably reaping the benefits of that. I think they have to live with the decision they made and find a way to make it work. It doesn't mean they shouldn't trade THT for a player who fits better. This doesn't mean they shouldn't trade that first rounder. Does that first rounder really matter? If you can fix it where you're like, we're confident that we can win a title this year, then do so. But the article I wrote last week was like, when I wrote about Vogel, is like, does that player exist? Does that return exist? Where, from what I see, getting an Eric Gordon or a Terrence Ross, like, is that going to make this team suddenly championship level? To me, no. To me, I'm like, maybe you should just sort of, I use the expression in the article, like, when you're in a hole, what's the first step to getting out of the hole is to stop digging, right? Yeah. Don't keep digging. And if you trade away THT or 2027, if you trade away Austin Reeves, if you trade away X, Y, or Z, and you're left with like nothing and it doesn't work, and then next year you're basically screwed. At this point, LeBron hits free agency, and either you let him go and you just try to figure out how to start over and either trade AD or build around AD, or you just, but you're so asset poor. They're already asset poor right now. Mm-hmm. You want to make it worse if it doesn't solve the problem. Maybe the solution is, fire Vogel because he's the scapegoat. Make a smaller trade. Hope the buyout market is favorable. Get knocked out in the first round or the play-in, and that just might be their fate. Or maybe LeBron and AD and the team somehow they figure it out. Get to a second round. They don't look like maybe Draymond Green isn't healthy and he's not healthy right now. Maybe he doesn't come back. Warriors without Draymond Green are a very vulnerable team. He's the engine that runs that team. Obviously, Steph is brilliant, but the engine of who that team is, as far as a secondary offense, when a team blitzes and gets the ball out of Steph's hand, all that offense runs out of Draymond's brain more than anything else. Mm-hmm. And defensively, he's the anchor of that team as well. It's not just who he's guarding individually, it's him calling out what the other teams are doing and telling the players who are less experienced, who don't have the instincts, where to go, what to do, what's coming. He's among the best. He should be a Hall of Famer based on what he does, and especially as a second round pick. I'm shocked, at the career he's had. It's a tribute to him as a player. So, from that point of view, if he's not there, the Lakers have a real shot. The Suns look like a better team than the Lakers. We'll see.
Yeah.
I could squint and find a way that it could all work for them. But with the roster that they have, with the way things are going right now with Westbrook, I'm not going to make them a favorite against any of these teams. Not right now. Not based on what we have no reason to believe that things are going to be different. But when AD gets back, they should be better than a 500 team. They should be able to win 6 out of 10, maybe 7 out of 10. But their schedule, they had all the easy games in the first half. They had all the home games in the first half. Now everything's on the road. Almost every game's against a good team. That will either sharpen them or it'll kill them. So, good fun ahead.
You're not wrong about that. You're not wrong. And I'm with you. I would not trade an asset to get off Westbrook at this point. I just think it's, like you said, for a team that's asset poor already, there's no point in trading an asset to get off Westbrook's contract when, even though, like you said, I think Wall was good last year, it's still the point of he hasn't played since last year. So you don't know what you're getting out of him. And I don't think the Lakers want to admit that it was a bad trade at this point. And I also think it's an optic situation there. Like, I really do. So, yeah. But moving on to some names of players, just in general, right? Obviously, we talked about Jeremy Grant. I'm really intrigued to see what his trade market is because, I don't know. I feel like there's not many sellers this year, so the value of these players has become super inflated. Of guys like Grant, I'm intrigued is what more than anything to see what a package for a Jeremy Grant would look like at the trade deadline.
It's a complicated situation for a lot of reasons. Usually more complicated than just like what is a player worth. That's subjective. It's relative to each thing. So those things can be complicated, right? But kind of like with the THT story, where you start looking at it from a different point of view and you see like, okay, I get like the loss of control of his contract is an issue. In the case of Jeremy Grant, number one, he left Denver to become a primary offensive player on a team. That's how he views himself. Right or wrong, that's how he views himself. The fact that he's on a team that's not winning isn't the most important thing to him. It's more that he's had the opportunity to grow as a player and to show that he belongs as one of the top scorers in the NBA, right? I don't know where he stands, but, like that kind of player. I don't think he wants to go back to being what he was in Denver, which was the primary defender and the catch and shoot guy, playing in a corner, 3-and-D. I just don't think that's what he wants. So that's going to limit the number of teams who go after him because if he doesn't want to be there and he wants that, then that's not a good fit either. Additionally, he's up for a contract in a couple of years, right? So he's on a similar schedule to Taylon Horton Tucker, where he's got one more year. He doesn't have the option. THC has the option, so his can go longer. But in the case of Grant, he's a free agent in 2023, and there are a lot of teams that will have money, and he's going to be either getting an extension before then, and to get an extension, he's going to want 120%, which is the max that he can get, and he's going to want as many years as possible, and he's going to want as much money. And that's not for everyone. Not every team's going to trade for him knowing, like they've already put out there through the media and whatnot, that he's expecting wherever he goes that they're going to give him that extension. So it's kind of buyer beware. So it's limited the market to an extent. And so like there are teams that would go after him, but maybe I've heard mixed things on the Lakers. Even, it's one of those things where sometimes the team will try and get rebuffed and then put it out there that they don't like the player and they don't want the player. I don't know if that's the case, but I'd actually heard the Lakers had kind of passed on Grant, that he doesn't want to play secondary or tertiary role to LeBron and AD, that They're going to have to invest big money in him. He's going to be close to 30. He's going to finish that contract about 32, the next contract, 33, in that range. And if you're paying him like 30 million towards the end of that, that's a lot to take on if you're going to keep paying AD and LeBron. I would argue, like, okay, if he's the perfect fit and you can get to that, and if you could work around, find a way to get him to buy into that role of being, he's going to be a primary scorer on the second unit. He's going to still have a huge offensive role on the first unit. Maybe there's a way of making it happen. But I don't think that Detroit values THT the way that the Lakers need that to happen. You'd have to do like a multi-team trade to get Detroit something that is that value. And I don't know if that it's possible. And then you start looking around and it's like, I'd heard Dallas mentioned, I'd heard New Orleans mentioned. The team that I just wrote about, I think it's in my article that just came out today, which is Monday, I believe, although I don't know what day it is oftentimes. I believe that the Wizards have a really good shot at getting Jeremy Grant. That seems to be where the buzz is heading, where that's a team that they kind of have in a good way, they have like too many players. Like they can't play all the players that they have because they had some injuries. Thomas Bryant was out for about a year and a half. He's back now. Rui Hachimura was dealing with some personal issues. Didn't start the season until, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago. I'd have to look, but in that range. So they didn't have Rui playing. They have Denny, who's a nice young rookie, well, second-year player now, who a lot of teams liked in the draft and think has a lot of potential. Doesn't get enough time. Kyle Kuzma's been really solid for them. But they can't play all these guys. They've got Bryant, Antrez, and Daniel Gafford. That's too many bigs. Not to mention Bertans. Bertans has a contract that's not particularly friendly, so if they can get out of that. I've also heard that they don't love the fit of Bradley Beal and Spencer Dinwiddie. So there's some openness to making a change there. That doesn't mean they'll trade Spencer, but they're willing to, from what I understand, they're willing to talk Spencer Dinwiddie in trades. That doesn't mean they'll get to a trade. Doesn't mean they're trying to trade him, but they'll at least discuss him have serious discussions if there are any discussions to be had. So I do think that if you just look at everything they have in total, to me, there's enough combination of young and veteran and good contracts. If you don't try to force Bertans on them, maybe do Bertans and you take Olynyk back. I think Olynyk's contract isn't bad enough for them to take on Bertans because Olynyk only goes really one more year. He has another year after that with a slight guarantee. So I don't think they'll be able to get out of Bertans. You never know. I guess we will know on February 10th. So but I don't really appreciate that expression. You'll never know. No, we're going to know. Never is not February 10th. February 10th is February 10th. That's when we'll know. So, we'll have to see. I think that Grant is valued, but I had Turner as the top player to be traded. Then he had a foot injury, and now he's sort of dropped. And then teams sort of scramble. I know Utah would love to get Jeremy Grant, but they don't. Like Utah, as however asset poor the Lakers are, I think the Jazz are even more asset poor because, like, I love Joe Ingles. I love his story, but he's over 30. Bogdanovich is over 30. Conley's over 30. Clarkson's not having a great year, and it is really a specialized fit anyway. He's not perfect for every team. You're not going to trade your top 2 stars, and then they have no picks. And they don't really have any kids because, Azubuike is a rookie they drafted he's a second-year player, I think. So they drafted him last year. Hasn't done much. I don't think Eric Pascal's doing enough. Like Jared Butler hasn't gotten enough opportunity to show what he can do. The only youngish player is Royce O'Neal. And I don't think Royce O'Neal brings back a ton of value, not to mention that he was born in 93. So he's already like 28-ish. So, yeah. You know what I mean? So it's, I don't, being that we've mostly focused on the Lakers, I don't think they're in the worst place in the league compared to other teams. But, it's hard to find the teams that want, the teams that can, the teams that will, and the teams that are desirable with the return for the team that's offering the trade. So, Miles Turner, same thing. now you've got an injured player. So I heard Dallas was into Miles Turner. That was probably where he was going to end up. They have some pieces that Rick Carlisle really values, Dorian Finney-Smith, players that he coached, that he wants to coach in Indiana. And so they were going to get a deal done. And then he gets hurt. And now, Dallas is more wishy-washy because they don't want to get a player who's hurt. That kind of derails what they're trying to do. So maybe they should go after Grant. And I could see a Dorian Finney-Smith based swap where they're getting a cheaper version of Grant, who's not the offensive player, but like a defensive wing. Let the offense run through Cade, Sadiq Bey, and they'll probably try to target a big player in free agency or the draft or something like that. So there's a lot of questions, but I don't think all the teams know what they would do, and I don't think even today they would know entirely what they would do. They probably have something written down as far as their line, and probably what they're being asked of is past that line right now. And so they're holding out that they have their second or third choices. But why would you go for your second or third choice on January the 30th, right? January 31st. Why are you going to go on February the 5th with your last choice, your third choice, or whatever? By the time you get to February 8th, now it's like, all right, maybe we need to settle for something. By the time you get to the 9th, by the time you get to the 10th, it's like either do or do not. You got to make your deal. So that's where we're headed. And I think all of these questions require teams to make sacrifices. Not all of them, but most of them require someone making a sacrifice somewhere.
Yeah.
And they're not ready to do that yet.
I think the sacrifice and not being ready to do that, I think that's where Daryl Morey is with Ben Simmons. I don't think he's getting back a top 30 or what. I think he's changed the criteria to a top 40 player now. I don't know. I think you're wasting an elite Joel Embiid year where he stayed healthy and he looked absolutely phenomenal. And okay, I understand wanting to get back value for Ben Simmons because Ben Simmons, I think the narrative went too far the other way this time on Ben Simmons, where people have come way too negative on him. He's still an all NBA type player, definitely one of the 2-3 best defenders in the league alongside Anthony Davis and Draymond Green, in my opinion. Rudy Gobert's probably up there somewhere as well. Where, I don't know, I think, you want a guy like a Dame Lillard back for Ben Simmons, but I don't think it's realistic at this point. I really don't. Do you see a Ben at this point? Unless
that's the key. I'm Daryl Morey. I heard you just say that. You've already answered the question. At this point,
I get that. I don't know. The way I look at it is, I think the more that time passes, the less that they get back for Simmons. I don't know what you think or what you've heard, but that's my perception of things.
Right. Well, I mean, again, it doesn't matter what I think or your perception. It matters what Daryl Morey's perception is. You know what I mean? And so he's somebody who he's looking at, like, we might, if I'm the Sixers, I'm Daryl Morey, and I'm saying we might be able to get Damian Lillard, Bradley Beal, James Harden somehow this summer with Simmons as part of a trade. I don't know if we're going to get that done, but those possibilities are zero if we do it now. Okay, so right now Dame is hurt, and they're probably going to extend him, but they haven't yet. And Dame is probably out for the season, so there's no reason there. Beal at this point is not available from Washington. I don't believe that Morey believes that it'll change by the 10th. I don't think he thinks that he'll get James Harden before the 10th. So if none of those pieces are available, and if you don't like the return that's available otherwise, maybe it's worth holding on until then, until this draft, this free agent period, making a decision then. Alternatively, and this is where I think things are, and I have an update in my article on Bleacher Report that you can find on it. It should be attached, or at least recently. Check my Twitter at Eric Pincus.
It'll be in the biography of the podcast.
Fantastic.
As well.
Yeah, my name's right there. So, but I think the price is getting off of Tobias Harris, and Harris is a good player, but he's not maybe an A player, but he's paid like an A player. He's making like 35-ish million. I mean, he's paid like he's one of the best players in the league, and he's not, and that's okay. I'm happy for Tobias, Like he's 36 this year, 37.8, or sorry, 37.6 the next year, then 39.3. So he's a lot of money for 2 more years beyond this one. And you're starting to get into Westbrook territory where it's not what Westbrook can do next year. That's the problem on the court. It's that he's going to get paid $47 million to do it. That's a problem. And if you're talking about 30 something and then another year, when teams have like, yeah, we want to go after these players, we want to hit cap room in these years, and you're going to now tie that all up in Tobias Harris, it's a difficult one. And so you kind of get to a quandary where, like, I'd heard that De'Aaron Fox is, quote, untouchable, except he's probably touchable for Ben Simmons. But he's untouchable for Ben Simmons and Tobias Harris because they don't want both. They don't want to pay that price of paying Tobias Harris just to get Ben Simmons and now give up arguably their best player, right? Like, so now you say, fine, what if we keep Fox? We'll trade for Tobias and Ben Simmons, but we'll use Buddy and we'll use Harrison Barnes, Bagley. Well, now you're paying Fox a max, you're paying Simmons a max, you're paying really a max to Harris, and now you've got 3 maxes, and that's really hard to function. That's like when we start getting into the, the issues with the Lakers or the issues even on a lower scale with the Heat. It's really hard to, unless you have 3 max players who fit perfectly together and are winning you titles, it's not realistic for most teams. So if they won't do Fox and take on those 2 guys, and they won't do Fox, and they won't take on those 2 guys without Fox. Kings, they can't keep Fox and take on those 2 guys. You run into a quandary. And from what I understand, the Kings are the most likely team to get something done. I think Atlanta's in a similar boat. My analysis before the year, after the playoffs, after their success, after they paid who they paid, was that the Hawks are going to have to trade out of Reddish and Gallinari just to be able to afford to keep Hunter long term. And even that might result in tax. And this is a team that hasn't paid tax since like 2011 or something like that. It's like 10 years. Like, they just don't pay the tax. Maybe they will. Maybe that's changed. But getting out of money was sort of the path for them anyway. Bringing in Simmons is a ton of money. So my computation is if they were going to bring in Simmons, they have to get out of Collins to stay out of the tax. And even then, they may not stay out of the tax. But now you say they're bringing in Simmons and Harris. Now they're a tax team, and you're paying Trey, you're paying Herder, who's not a max, but you're paying him some, Bogdanovich. And now you say, well, fine. Now we start throwing pieces out there. Now you're trading away your depth, right? And now it's Trey, Simmons, Capella, Harris. Who else? Who do you keep? Herder, and then everybody else has to be like minimum guys, and at that point you can't pay Hunter. It's an artificial restriction where they could pay tax, and like I said with the Lakers situation, like they could trade Westbrook for Wall, and trade THT and all those other dudes, and raise their payroll as such that they're now paying an extra $50 million in tax. In addition to the salary, so pay another $65 million. Are they willing to put another $65 million into the budget to be a better team, and do any of those moves demonstrably make you a better team? Same kind of issue here. Like, the Hawks can make these changes. The Kings can make these changes, but number one, does it make you better? Does it make you an elite team? And 2, if it doesn't, and you're locked into massive luxury taxes, and not on the level that we described with the Lakers, but significant, real luxury tax, now you're kind of stuck. So this is the holdup. It's the Sixers saying, fine, but you will do something, but you got to take Harris. And teams saying at this point, no, we can't do that. Maybe something will shift in a demand somewhere, maybe on the Philly side, maybe on another. The posturing that we have is that Philly will just wait for someone like Beal, Dame, Harden, and they keep selling that narrative. Right. And you read it. If you go read somebody, you're going to hear there's articles coming out now about how the Sixers want to try to get Harden. And I don't know exactly how they're trying to do that, because if it's a sign and trade, that's a problem. because of a hard cap, and that kind of takes us back to the beginning of the show. But it is what it is. I can't wait to see how it resolves. But if there's somebody who's willing to say "F this," I'm going to do it my way. That's Daryl Morey. That's just how he thinks, and I respect that of him. I think he's made some really good moves. I think he's made some iffy moves through his tenure. I think he's got really good strengths. I think he has some really clear weaknesses. He's a human being, of which all of us are. So, or at least most of us anyway. And so, I think that I don't think he's wrong in the way he's approaching it. Now, wrap that up. The point you said was, are you wasting Embiid's great year? Maybe. Very, very possibly, yes. But also the opportunity cost of getting a lesser deal now, but then adding an elite scorer next to him next year to really boost his prime, that's the trade-off. And then there's the risk that you may not get those guys, and you did waste a year. So I don't have an answer for you because there is no answer. That's the thing. Right now, today, there's no answer. And for you, you're getting sick of the deadline stuff. For me, this is like, I thrive in this. This is kind of where my job is. And then it kind of like, I have to digest everything that happened after it's over, process everything, and I start building out what's going to happen in the off season, start trying to project. I'm already starting to project the off season, but I don't have all the data. Once you have the final rosters at the deadline, you have a better picture of the data, and then you could start to really make sense of at least what I'm good at, in my opinion anyway. I'm good at setting the table. I'll give you the menu of this is what the topics will be. These will be the decisions that need to be made. I can't tell you what the choices will be, what they pick, but I can tell you what the conversation will be about and why there will be a problem in this way, why there'll be a problem in that way. Some of these things are very predictable. Some are not. And every so often you get like, wow, I didn't expect that. But like, I would be surprised if Beal ended up on the Sixers. But at the same time, I'm not counting it out, right? Like, he's been really patient, and they made some great moves and they made some strides, but they're kind of a 500 team still. So maybe Bradley's just like, all right, I did everything I was supposed to do. I'm going to go play for and maybe they can get Simmons for him, but is that even what they would want? Like, and the last point is like you said that it's gone too far when it comes to the pendulum on Simmons as a player, but I think where it is with Simmons as a guy who's willing to sit out a year and not play and basically say in so many words he'd play for 29 other teams, he just won't play for Philly and won't honor his contract. I think there's a lot of people around the league who look at that and say, like, I don't want to touch that guy with period. There's some teams wouldn't take him for free. And that's just reality. I'm not saying he's right or they're right. I'm just sort of mapping out what some of the analysis that I can say from talking to people, from getting their opinions and from just listening to what they have to say. There are definitely a lot of people who feel that way about Ben Simmons.
And to be clear, I really enjoyed listening to you and reading your articles about the trade deadline and everything to go on. It's the other noise around it, and we talked about it a little bit pre-recording and stuff like that. Stuff that you do is phenomenal, and I live for that stuff because that stuff's great. Because, like you said, it sets the table very well. There's a lot of great content, a lot of great analysis. I just hate the misinformation that goes on at this time of year.
I fully understand that.
And it's through no fault of guys like you, because you do such a great job. The last topic I want to touch on, and I know we've gone quite long, but I feel like it's been a really great episode, is the Indiana situation. Because I didn't expect Indiana to be this bad with a coaching upgrade, in my opinion, going from Nate Bjorkgren to Rick Carlisle. Domantas Sabonis is an interesting one for me, because if I was them, I would not be entertaining any trades for him whatsoever, because he's the type of guy, especially on the contracts he's on, he's the type of guy that you build around in an organization. They have a lot of cost on that contract on that team, because obviously you have Brogdon, you have Turner, then you have lesser guys who are making quite a bit of money as well. I'm sure you know the specifics of that a lot better than I do. I'm just wondering what happens there, because I feel like, I know obviously Brogdon can't get traded until after the trade deadline anyway, because of the extension that he signed. I'm just wondering what happens with that team, whether Sabonis is a legit candidate to be traded, because I don't know. I wouldn't do it if I was a GM, but again, I'm not a GM. I'm just a random guy in England doing a podcast.
Well, I mean, it is a complex thing. So, like, the Pacers realized last year that they'd pretty much reached like their peak, and they weren't going to be better than they had been. And a lot of that has to do with health. Like, they could say, well, let's wait and see. Are we maybe PJ? PJ, which PJ is it? It's
TJ Warren.
TJ. I got stuck on the P. No, TJ Warren. Maybe TJ Warren comes back. Maybe Levert is healthy. Maybe Brogdon's healthy. Maybe it all fits. But like, realistically, it goes back to the Lakers discussion. Like, it's rare when you're all healthy all the time. Like, injuries just happen. They got hit really early. TJ had setbacks. TJ McConnell got hurt. Brogdon's had some issues. Sabonis had some issues. Turner has some issues. They're snake bit. And they kind of already felt like their upside was limited. Then you bring in a new coach, and while I think you can argue it's an upgrade, I don't think they have the roster that fits his style. I think that's very significant. I think they also play two bigs for a coach who doesn't want to play two bigs. At least not these two particular bigs. Like, they were willing to say through the last few years, we think playing big still has merit. And the results were adequate, you know what I mean? But they're a team that is kind of barred by ownership to flat out rebuild, and barred from ownership to spend into the tax. They're kind of a middle ground team in their resources, smaller market, lower budget than other teams. That's okay. Everybody has like their strengths and weaknesses, and the Grizzlies don't have a huge budget and they're doing really well. The Bucks historically haven't and are a small market team and won a title. So it's not to say Indiana should feel bad or hopeless. It's just that they have to manage what they have the way that they have to manage it. And in the case of Sabonis, there's a similarity in a way, different to like Zach Randolph. Very different players, but at the same time, they're like really high talented scoring bigs who don't really defend very well, and probably have to play center but can't necessarily play center and protect the rim that you would want to center. Like, you had Gasol next to Zach, and that combination worked because Gasol was like a defensive player of the year at some point. And so they've tried to kind of do that with Turner, but it hasn't really worked. And the way that the NBA has shifted, it's getting harder and harder to play double bigs. And so Turner's been shooting more threes, and Sabonis can spread the floor, and it kind of can work. But ultimately, they're looking to move Turner. They're looking to move Levert. They're very open to moving Sabonis in the right situation. But the price is like, we talked about De'Aaron Fox. Like, that's closer to the price of moving a Sabonis. Like Turner, you might get back pieces from Dallas, if he wasn't hurt. You might get from Charlotte, they could probably get Gordon Hayward or something built around PJ Washington, or maybe both, maybe PJ Washington and Gordon Hayward, probably Jeremy Lamb in that deal as well. Like, there are ways to get it to work. And I think Charlotte is more patient. And that's what I wrote about, was that they're just in a place where they're not like, oh, we have to win right now. We're really happy that we've grown and we're going to continue to grow, but we don't fully know who we are yet. So let's not go crazy, but we could do to upgrade our center position. And if he's not fully healthy this year, but is a good long-term player for the next few years, that's worthwhile. Whereas for Dallas, they're sort of like, they're trying to win a little bit more in the here and now. And so, yeah, like, I agree with you that Sabonis, of the players, is the one to keep if they're going to keep one. But I do think that they're very open to moving him for another really, really good player. And maybe Fox with Duarte, maybe Brogdon becomes more expendable next year, although his contract runs on a few years. Maybe there's a way of building out a team that is in a very different fashion. But a lot of it has to do with Rick Carlisle and making it a team that Rick Carlisle wants to coach, because that's their choice. Like, there's some coaches that are just, they're going to adapt to whatever, and they're either going to succeed or fail adapting to what the GM does with the team. But they're not going to have a lot of say. They might get asked, but they're not an important cog in the decision process. I don't think Carlisle is that kind of coach. I think when they hired Carlisle, you're going to build a team around him. With Thibodeau, for the most part, you're going to try to, if you override Thibodeau, you're going to override him in a way that fits. Like, you're not going to trade Derrick Rose or Taj Gibson, like guys that he needs. You're still like, I don't know if he's ever going to play Cam Reddish, because I heard he didn't want Cam Reddish, but you'll override him, right? Because it was a good deal for them. They got him for nothing. It's like, you can get relatively speaking, Kevin Knox is a prospect, etc. But anyway, I think that ultimately the Pacers recognize that they don't have the roster for the coach. They have a ceiling that, because Sabonis is a poor defender who kind of has to play center in today's day and age, they can make it work, and they will try to make it work, but that it might not be a bad idea to just sort of wipe it out, start over. And then, just to wrap that up, like I said, they're not a team that can really full on rebuild. So while, from what I understand, injuries and whatnot, they've been given enough permission to rebuild this year. It's not like an OKC or like an old school Philadelphia rebuild where it could let it take 10 years or 6 years of drafting or something like that. Let's go collect a whole bunch of picks. Let's try to be terrible. That's not who the Pacers are going to be. They didn't get Rick Carlisle to be that. It doesn't match. If they had stuck with Nate and just sort of either Nate for that matter, the Nate before that, McMillan, then they might have gone on a different path. But they're on a specific path that matches the owner's thinking, that they're going to be a competitive team year in and year out. And that's needed for the small market team that they are. They can't afford to not have attendance. They can't afford to be, and they're not a high attendance team. So they've got to try to capture the imagination of their fan base. And you're not going to do that by being a rebuilding team for 4 or 5 years. They feel like the fans may never come back. And who knows, maybe that's accurate, maybe not. Indiana's a great basketball state, but I think it's more of a kind of like Memphis, Tennessee. Like it's more of a college basketball state than it is necessarily NBA. Although those Pacers teams with Reggie Miller really captured the imagination. That was a really fun time for a really long time. Reggie was a pretty special playoff player for them, even though he never quite won a championship. They were there. They were in the finals. They were going toe to toe with Michael and some of those Knicks teams that were really good in that era. So, and then they were good, with Paul George, and they were good with, before that too. Like they've always been good. They're always solid. And, to kind of wrap up all this is, I think it's not hard to build a playoff basketball team, to be honest. It's really hard to build a championship team. It's not really hard to get a team that's going to compete for a second round every year. You might even be able to get to second round every year by putting together the best veteran free agents that are out there. Your upside will be limited. You're never going to necessarily get to that ultimate goal, but you'll win, and you'll win like 45, 50 games a year, make the playoffs. That's not that hard, in my opinion. I think that's kind of where the Pacers have been, like putting together a team with solid players. Sabonis was a great pick. I love Sabonis. They didn't pick him; they traded for him. But Sabonis was like, when I was really high on him. But again, he's I love Zach too. Zach, I bumped into Zach a few months back at an AAU thing. He's a sweet guy. He had a little bit of a reputation when he first came into the league, but I think a lot of that was just immaturity, and I'm really fond of that guy. So Sabonis, great lineage, comes from a great Hall of Fame player. So that's not an easy thing if I'm trading him if I'm Indiana.
Yeah, and it's a really good point actually about Indiana. It's something that I never really thought about, but now when I'm going back into my head, I can't ever remember them what the highest pick they had was Miles Turner at 11th. It's never super high. So that's actually a really, really great point that I didn't really think about. But I don't know. I think they should go down that route, be a Memphis and rebuild for a couple of years, and then you have a lot of really good young players on really good salaries, which again, like you say, wouldn't break the bank for a team like that. But it's why the NBA is great. It's because you have so many different teams doing so many different things, right? It would be boring if everyone did the same thing.
Exactly.
Eric,
yep, and I'll just say that it just isn't. It's a lot easier from where we sit. That's
yes,
all. It's just easier from where we sit. It's a lot harder to actually do it when you're there with the politics and the drama and the injuries. And even when you make the right move and you're in the draft and you pick the right player, they make it hurt and not, it's a tough business, and people's jobs are lost because of things that were out of their control. So, but no, I appreciate you having me on. It's definitely been a fun chat. Definitely.
Yeah, I'm a sucker for long chats about the NBA, so I've absolutely loved every single second of this. Where can the people find all your great work?
Well, mostly you can find it on Twitter at Eric Pincus, and the name is right up there. But in case you're listening and not reading, it's EricPincus. And I tweet my workout on Bleacher Report. I work with Sports Business Classroom, which is a program if you're looking to get into the business of basketball, you want to get into the CBA, which is salary cap and whatnot, coaching, analytics, scouting, all the aspects, broadcast, even social media. We really help people get jobs, and we've had a great success rate, and we legit take a lot of pride in that. And so I can't speak highly enough of the program. So I'll be putting some material out on their site as well at some point. Every so often I do some videos and whatnot, but right now I'm just sort of trying to get through the deadline and survive. So good fun. But yeah, writing at least, a couple articles a week for Bleacher is probably the best way. So just check out my Twitter. But I appreciate, as I said, I appreciate you having me on.
And I hope that it won't be like 6 months again, 7 months again before I have you on again. Because, like I said, I'm a sucker for long chats, and this has been brilliant.
I appreciate that.
Thank you so much for everyone listening. Be sure to rate, review wherever you find this great podcast. Have a great day. Take care.